introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Decoteau J. Hopefully I pronounced your first name correctly. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so the first question I want to start with is how many people dreamed of being on the Park Advisory Council? Okay, well, I'm in good company because my involvement with Armstrong Park Advisory Council and my engagement with parks is it's accidental. That's what I like to say. I came to Chicago thinking I was going to hang out in the parks. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be there with my children and so on and so forth, and that's what I planned on doing. But life oftentimes has other plans, and so today I want to talk about my love story with the park that I'm a part of, Armstrong Park Advisory Council. So I moved to Chicago in 2015 with my wife, Shamika, who's the president of the PAC, and our two children, my son, Miles, and my daughter, Kayla. They were really small at the time, and they had a tremendous amount of energy and need to play. And I decided to kind of meander through the neighborhood a little bit, and I drove past Armstrong Park, and I remember like, it's a wonderful green space. I really, really liked it. I liked the houses. And so my wife, Shamika, and I started looking around the neighborhood, and we eventually made a decision to purchase in the proximity of Armstrong Park because we thought it was a wonderful place where our children could go and play, go to the basketball court, and it felt really good. But y'all, this was like November, so nobody was out there. Y'all know where I'm going, okay? Nobody was out there at the time, and I was thinking they're gonna be able to walk and play. It's gonna be wonderful. They're gonna ride bikes, and then spring came. And the idyllic Armstrong Park that I imagined in my mind was a far cry from the Armstrong Park that we started to encounter as the weather warmed up. And so today I want to talk a little bit about my accidental involvement and engagement with the parks. And I want to talk about 5 things that I've learned over time. First is to know your why. The second thing is to decide what, determine how, and then I'm going to talk quite a bit about this idea of noting progress because I found that that's really important. And the final thing is to give thanks. And so I want to start off with my why. So when we got to that park during the summertime, there were broken wine bottles and liquor bottles all over the place, huge gatherings. Sometimes we walked to the park and I'd be like, look, we're going to walk back home. There was a lot of adult behavior happening, and I'll let you use your imagination about what that might be. And it was a place, unfortunately, where children didn't often just go and kind of play. Our previous Park Advisory Council, and one of the members, Terry Irby, is here, laid a really strong foundation by building a playground, but it wasn't utilized the way that it could have been because it was actually a pretty dangerous place to be. Now, I would still take my children to that playground, but before I would actually even let them step foot into the play area, I had to scan it and pick up the materials that were left from the evening before, the day before. And so that was a routine thing that I did. These early experiences helped me understand why in our neighborhood, the entry point into the community for many people were the CAPS meetings and next door app. So I went to a couple CAPS meetings and I also got on next door, and both of those things stressed me out. And I decided that I would stop going and I would disconnect from next door app. Now, both of those things do offer some benefits to communities in terms of safety, but for me, they didn't offer the kind of creative approaches that were important for making the neighborhood welcoming, which is what I wanted it to be. And so I stopped attending the meetings, and I took it upon myself to do the small things that I could do. Now, I don't know the backstory to this, but one day my wife came home and said, hey, there's this thing called a Park Advisory Council. I went to the meeting. Since you don't want to go to CAPS meetings, you can come to these Park Advisory Council meetings. And by the way, I ran to become the vice president. I was like, really? Okay. And then she said, and by the way, nobody wants to be treasurer, so I want you to be the treasurer. I don't know who any of these people are or anything. So I went after she convinced me, and I met the people who were lovely people, and I ended up being the treasurer for the Park Advisory Council, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. But soon after, as I was engaging in the park, two experiences really changed my level of engagement. The first was my son at the time, he might have been about 2. And we were on the playground, and there was some adults on the playground, and one of those adults, while we were just playing, fell over. And long story short, a person overdosed on the playground. So we called the ambulance came, the ambulance had to come up, and they took the person away, did the Narcan dosage and everything. And I had to spend quite a bit of time talking with my son to convince him that the person did die, because in his mind, he was like, they fell over, an ambulance came, the ambulance put them in the back of it, she dead. That's what was in his mind. And so, I had talked to him about it, and for years, he would bring that up. When we would go to the playground, his memory was that this thing happened. He saw this person in his mind die on the playground. And so that was really troubling to me. And the second thing was that I some kind of way went back to a CAPS meeting. And y'all remember when they first started putting the divvy bikes in the neighborhood? Yeah. And so the kids would take the divvy bikes and they would shake the divvy bikes off some kind of way. I don't know how they did it, because the kids had divvy bikes all over the place. And they were riding. They were really riding. And so, but at the CAPS meeting, the conversation some kind of way turned to how to get the kids to not steal the divvy bikes. And so as people were brainstorming, they were talking about things like giving tickets to the kids and those sorts of things. And I was just like, wow, what if we just try to give kids the bikes instead of punishing them for taking bikes? Maybe they don't have bikes, so they don't have the things they need. So the first thing that I really spearheaded and engaged in the park was a bicycle and sporting goods drive. And what we did is we basically went around the neighbors, we talked to everybody we knew, and we asked people that if you had sporting goods or you had bicycles or anything in your garage that you were willing to share with children in the neighborhood, then please donate those, because we wanted them to be put to use. And so this was my first time kind of really being engaged in an event at the park, and it was a great success. We partnered with an elementary school, with a bicycle shop that did repairs on the bikes that people donated, and we were able to give a ton of bikes away and that sort of thing. So it was really, really good opportunity. And so what I figured out my why was, and this is some pictures of some of the people who were given bicycles, some of the young people who frequented the park, is that children and young people should have safe and welcoming places and the resources to be able to play, both in structured ways as well as unstructured play, which are really important for their development. And so it was around that time, both what happened to Miles and then what happened when I saw the success of the bicycle drive, that I understood my personal why, and that's when I really started to be committed to the work in a different kind of way. So once I understood the why, I had to understand, and we had to understand what a PAC wants. I kind of knew what I want, and my primary want was the opportunities for children to be able to enjoy the park, and that my kids would be able to walk to the park and play, and I didn't have to worry about them, and so on and so forth. And I wanted the same thing for other families in our neighborhood. And so we also had to understand what other people wanted. A lot of people were very concerned with safety, ending the large gatherings that was happening in the park. There was a lot of cars driving on the lawn, driving on the track, parking on the basketball court. I could go on, but this is a love story. But I want to give you all some context about how difficult and how hard and challenging it can be to be in love with the spaces in your community when there's a lot of issues that are going. So we know we wanted it to be beautiful, we wanted it to be safe, both in terms of people's interactions, but also just physically safe. So we worked on getting the water fountain replaced. We made sure we started to do cleanups and that sort of thing to pick up glass. And we wanted to be welcoming in terms of how people interacted with one another. And that was as simple as saying hello, good morning, how are you doing? So we started to really be intentional about doing those things, and eventually wrote down a list of things that we thought were really important to accomplish. And so one of them, for example, was a water fountain, right? Eventually we started to in 2018, we started to have conversations about a fence to keep the cars out of the park. So we wrote those things down and really started having conversations about what that looked like. There were other things that kind of more fell by the wayside that people were interested in, for example, like events and programming. And that wasn't something that we as a PAC really dug into, but there were people who were interested in that. And I'll talk a little bit about how we made sure we kind of included multiple people with different interests. So I'm just going to click through to show you some of the things that we initially envisioned. Again, we didn't necessarily have the energy or the manpower to do a lot of events, but what we could do is make it a welcoming place where other organizations and groups wanted to use our park, and then we invited them into the space to be able to do that. And so some of these things were supported by the Chicago Park District, some from community groups that were partnered with the Park District, and then we were blessed one time to get the Blues Festival to come down thanks to Alderman Dowell. She saw the work that we were doing and that we wanted it to be an open and welcoming place, and so we were excited for the Blues Festival. Right? And then finally, we had a dream eventually of creating an opportunity to have children play baseball and softball in our neighborhood. And I'll show you some pictures about what that was like, because there was this one huge part of the park that was underused because it was basically big piles of mud. So to determine how is really important. So as I was preparing this presentation, I thought about, what was the why? How do we accomplish what it is that we accomplished? And a lot of it was focus, and being intentional about doing the things that will allow us to have victories and small wins as we led up to the big things. Our biggest victory, I would say right now, is that we have a fence all the way around our park, which is huge. We've been working on and advocating for a long time. But to get there required that we had to demonstrate our commitment, that we did fundraising, that we talked to the park to ask them to match the energy that we were giving, so on and so forth. So some of the things that I want to just really mention really quickly are some key things that we actually did. So the first thing is that we understood the conditions in the IRCs. So that's both the good conditions and the things that were working well as the things that weren't working well for our small park, right? We didn't have a field house, so we had a lot of challenges, right? So again, I mentioned the large gatherings, trash and littering problems. Some days you would come out and you would be like, what is really going on? What is really going on? It would be that much trash. But we had good things that we built on. So we wanted to build on the legacy and the successes that the previous PAC team had handed us, which were maintaining our playground. So there's some pictures of us remulching. So we did all those things because they actually got the playground installed. We also were just advocating for trash. We formed the Pick Up the Parks with Chicago Parks Foundation. And we started doing that on a regular basis. And a lot of folks in the community would say, well, the park looks a mess. What is the park district doing? We was like, well, the park district comes on Tuesdays. We have a small park, right? It's about 8 acres. They come on Tuesday. If we want it to look clean on Monday, we got to get out there and pick up on Sunday, all right? So we started to organize volunteers to be able to do that. So we wanted to do upkeep. We also saw that we had a huge open field. It was wonderful. We had flag football there. And then we also saw baseball diamonds, which were there, but which were in very poor condition. We could have looked the other way and said these are in bad condition, but we looked at them as an asset and something that we could ask other people and we should invest in trying to improve. So understanding the conditions, how people feel about the park, and the things that irks them was really important. And as much as the quote-unquote complaining may not feel good, we found that really listening to people's complaints is really an opportunity to understand their passions and their commitments. If they won't complain about it, if they don't take the time to complain about it, then they're not passionate about it. And so the people who don't say anything are the people who, may not necessarily be as invested. And so we looked at the complaining as an investment and as a commitment that people have for our park. So the other thing, which is a lot of what I do, is interesting. I was telling people, I'm surprised I'm up here because I'm pretty quiet. I do a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. But I wanted to talk really quickly about the idea of building an infrastructure. So the things that I kind of brought to the PAC were creating a bank account, getting a fiscal sponsorship. As the treasurer, I started to turn to the PAC members and say, can everybody donate something? Because when I go ask for money, I want them to tell them that people who are on our PAC, we have a 100% giving rate for the members of our PAC. If you can give $10, cool. If you can give $250, that's cool. But I want to say that everybody gives. We started being more meticulous with our meeting minutes. We created committees, and these committees were intended to really make sure that everybody was able to work on their own passions, whether it was beautification or safety. So we have people who go to the CAPS meetings so I don't have to go to the council meetings, right? And then we also have fundraising and stakeholder engagement. I also set up our bank account during the pandemic. We set up a Zoom account. We have an announcement kiosk because we don't have a field house and we had a difficult time letting people know what was happening. They will walk up the day of and be like, I didn't know that this was happening. And so we installed a kiosk and we created things like signage that you see here. Some of the problems that we had is we would call and say that there's cars parked on the area of the basketball court, but there was no signs that said no parking. So we had to get no parking, no driving on the walkway signs and those sorts of things. And then we did creative things to mitigate the problems with trash. Y'all see we put these little basketball things. We would take sidewalk chalk. And there was so much trash around the basketball court. We would put the trash can in there. We would draw a little perimeter and we would be like 3 pointers. And we put these messages all throughout the park like, keep your park clean, take care of your park. And we did it in a positive way, not to say like, stop littering. It would say like, yeah, I know you got that nice 3-pointer. Go ahead and throw that into the trash can. And we started to see a huge, remarkable difference when we started to have this kind of positive encouragement and messaging with, especially the young people who congregated around our basketball court. Relationships near and far was something that I learned. Maceo is here, and there's wonderful people. Maceo Johnson, who's our area manager, and there's our park supervisor, Keisha Taylor, our previous supervisor, Renee Shepherd Owens. All of these are people who we had to develop relationships with in the neighborhood. And we also developed relationships outside of the neighborhood, which means coming to things like this. And those things really started to pay forward, not necessarily in a transactional way, like I need something from you right now, but it made a difference when you had a positive interaction or a conversation at lunch with somebody who at some point in the future proved very important to help something that we wanted to do. So here I wanted to list some of the people who we've worked with, and also shout out our Bronzeville PAC Coalition, which Kahari Humphreys may or may not be here, but he started this group of folks and was basically like, I want to bring people together so that we can just get together a couple times a year and start to share the challenges we're having, but also the successes that we're having as PACs. And so we started meeting 3 times a year and started to say what we called ourselves as Bronzeville Area PAC Coalition. And that's still ongoing today, and we share resources and support one another, share events, and make sure that we don't both have 2 major events happening, 6 blocks apart. So we kind of try to coordinate and communicate with one another so we can support one another's programming events. All of these people are partners. Cubs Charities gave us a grant to refurbish our baseball diamonds. I'll talk about that in a minute. Friends of the Park, I went to their workshops early on and got a lot of information and just started doing what they said, this is what you can do, right? And I just started following those directions. So all of those relationships were important for the success that we've had. Now this is one, and I know I'm between y'all's lunch. But I think this right here is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned is the ability to be able to notice your wins and note your progress. And when I'm saying note your progress, it means to note it mentally in your own mind and with the people on your PAC, but also to let people know the progress that you're actually making. Because what I'm talking about, we're going back to 2016, 2017, and the progress that we've been able to make has been slow. And there was a lot of reasons that I could have said, you know what, this is too much, I'm a volunteer. But I didn't because I understood the progress that we were making along the way. So behind this is when our baseball diamonds were being refurbished from the generous contribution of a Cubs Charities grant. It's one of their capital improvement grants. And so this is Shamika, my wife, out here with the contractors refurbishing our baseball diamonds. This was a big win, all right? Now the thing about the big wins is that people see that progress and people know because you can see it. But along the way, there's many other kind of things that I want to just name for people, especially new PACs or PACs that are struggling, that you should count as successes because those successes and naming them are the things that are important to keep folks going. So I'll categorize progress as big, medium, small, and invisible. The big progress are the things that people know, right? And so I talked about the cars on the drive through our field, and this was a picture, y'all. This was a punch in the gut. A couple of months after we got our baseball diamonds refurbished, We didn't have a fence. We got the baseball diamonds refurbished. Before we could even throw the first pitch and play on the diamonds, cars did donuts over the entire park. The whole thing. We was like, wow, we can't believe it. You know? I don't know if it felt good, but we realized it's something that happens at other parks. That didn't make it feel any better. But we were just like, wow, okay, so this fence that we've been talking about since 2018, we really need this. We want to protect the investment that the Cubs have made. The pickup job we couldn't do, we really needed partners within the park district to be able to do some of these things for us. We couldn't fix a basketball goal. We can tell people to pick up trash, that sort of thing on the basketball court, but we couldn't fix these goals. So we have people who are able to do those things. And I call these medium wins and medium progress. And then there's the small that are really nerve-wracking. Now, I put this picture up here because people didn't want to walk around and use the track because there was like bottles and that sort of thing. And I told y'all about the bottles before. I took this picture and shared it with members of our PAC because this is progress. It don't look like it. But these people who would come and drink in the bar, piled them all up in one area. Seriously. They piled them up in one area. And I had some other pictures I had to choose. But, I mean, we got to the point where, like, all the liquor bottles and everything, it would be a mountain. And I was just like, wow, well, you know, they could have walked everything to the trash can, but at least we're making progress because they're not smashing them on the ground anymore. They put them in one area, they piling them up, they're filling up bags. Now, they might not take the bag to the trash can, but they're doing the things that, for me, I said, people, this is progress. And we got to keep in mind. Now, if you're new and you haven't been a part of the park community, this looks awful. And we do want people to use the trash receptacles and the recycling receptacles. But this is progress, because I was overjoyed when I took this picture, y'all. Right? This is success for us, right? And so the other thing is like the trash cans, they're overflowing, but at least people are taking the time, as opposed to it just being a trash can is overflowing and people be like, well, the trash can is overflowing. We start to see people piling trash now. Sometimes we would see a trash can, but it would be garbage just all around it, trash all around it. But you could tell that people was considerate enough to bring it over to where the trash can was. And so these are the things that are the deal breakers and the reasons that a lot of people have left, because they couldn't conceptualize and appreciate that this is actually a sign of progress. And then finally, there's the invisible. And the invisible are the things like going to budget meetings and talking about the things that are happening in the park that are a direct result of budget requests, setting up a bank account, PayPal, scan codes, updating that PAC binder that's supposed to be in the field house, submitting the PAC annual report, fiscal sponsorship, filling out that form, and then participating and supporting like-minded groups. So part of the success and progress is that we have been invited to be a thought partner and contribute to other park advisory councils and their thinking. And so this picture here is actually when we were invited to talk with folks from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who's in the process of setting up park advisory council systems in Baton Rouge. And so it was an honor to be able to do this, but this is the invisible stuff that community members and sometimes even people who come to PAC meetings don't see. And it's important to name and highlight and put in the meeting notes all of these invisible things so that the people coming behind us know what makes a PAC successful, because it's not only focusing specifically on your park, it's about being a member of the ecosystem of Chicago parks. And then finally, it's important, and sometimes I have to do this as just a practice, is to thank people. And when I say it's a practice, even people who sometimes I don't want to thank. So I was sitting in a session about conflict, and there's people in our neighborhood. I've given a love story, but there's conflict. You know, I've been in meetings that I got went off on. I know that there's people who don't like me. I keep showing up because I understand, I know my why. And sometimes my why comes into conflict with other people's why. Okay? And that's okay. I know my why, I understand their why, and that gives me an understanding of who they are and some empathy about what they're bringing to the table. But thanking people is really important, because it's the everyday people, as I've written here, who power the parks. Rosca Escarina, Maria Stone, Art Richardson, Maceo Johnson, Keisha Taylor, Renee Shepard Owens, Terry Irving, Shamika Irby. These are all people who I try to thank, even if it's by email, and then we also send out, sometimes Terry is she is our person who distributes information around the neighborhood, and sometimes I'll send her something and say, can you please blast this public thank you out so we can thank Alderman Dow in the Park District and the Cubs. And so it's important to thank people. And saying thank you is a very, very powerful tool that I think a lot of people, is in everybody's toolkit, but that everybody doesn't use. And then finally, the final thing that I want to say is that, again, going back to the why, the legacy, starting off with my children and wanting to make sure that they had a place to play, and now helping them understand that they, and modeling that they are people who can actually create the communities and the relationships and the resources that they want and that they deserve and that they need. And so with that in mind, I want to give a shameless plug that we are having a Juneteenth baseball and softball invitational tournament on June 19th at our park. If your park advisory council has little people who play baseball and softball, we would love to invite you to our first tournament. Now we're at a stage where we're going to be activating the park with programming and events for young people, and baseball is a huge part of that. So with that, y'all, I thank you so much. I appreciate it.